The whole idea of the infinite banking concept, this is on page 37, started with the realization that there is a huge amount of nonsense going on in the marketplace because of the misclassification of things. So, in regard to whole life, specifically whole life for becoming your own banker and the infinite banking concept.
The whole idea of the infinite banking concept started with the realization that there's a huge amount of nonsense going on in the marketplace because of the misclassification of things. For instance, take the case of the common potato. In the 1500s, the conquistadors of Spain were down in South America, in what is now Peru, looking for gold. They didn't find much gold, but what they did find was a plant that they took back to Europe. It was the potato. But no one in Europe would have anything to do with it because the botanists of the time identified the plant as one from the family Solanaceae. This family has a large number of poisonous plants in it, such as deadly nightshade, jimsonweed.
Welcome to the Cashflow Legendz podcast with your hosts Nate, Brandon, and Brock. Remember, our insights are not direct financial advice, so consult with your financial team before making any decisions based on the topics discussed in this.
Welcome back to Cashflow Legendz. Nate and I are excited to be here and continue our book walk through becoming your own banker. And we hope that all, when you listen or when you're watching on YouTube, you lean into this reality that Nelson, when he wrote Becoming Your Own Banker in 2000, could have rewritten the book multiple times after that, Nate, but he never did. And he often has said, per all of our friendships who knew Nelson personally, that if he were to rewrite the book, he'd have left the numbers out of it on the back end of the book. Now, we're not there yet. We're only in page 36, 37, 38, 39, and creating the entity.
Just for clarification, he originally published the first version of the book in 2000, and then there were 5 editions where there were updates that were made. The last edition was finalized in 2008 or published in 2008.
Yeah. So even from guys who knew Nelson in 2008 and beyond, I'm thinking of James Nether and some of those conversations we've had who knew him really well. What Nelson said to them is that the numbers, when you look at the charts, get people really off track because the numbers don't matter if you don't understand the behavior piece in the first half of the book. Now, remember, as a refresher, we've gone through Parkinson's law. We've talked about arrival syndrome some. We've talked about the Willie Sutton law. We've talked about use it or lose it. And all of those things, if you're the first time listening to this and you hear that, you go, what does that have to do with money? And Nate, I would say that that's the most important place to start. Because if we understand what that has to do with money, we're going to be on a whole new journey of how we view money in our life.
Yeah, and the way Nelson wrote the book was really building up the case for why whole life insurance made more sense than anything else. And some people, I've heard this in the past, like the book frustrated them because they wanted to get there faster.
Yeah.
But if you go back and you reread this book over the years, you start to see more and more wisdom in not only the content, but the way the content is structured and how each piece builds onto the next.
It's a great point, Nate. And it's very hard to wrap your brain around the first time you read it, like you just perfectly described. You're almost like, because think about it, in the world today, and I say in the world today, anybody that's 50 or younger, you are used to being sold to quickly. There's always a hook with some bait on it. And if you bite it, then you go into the next thing that it's connected to. And it's quick. And what Nelson did by how he wrote Becoming Your Own Banker is he made you think about how you think. And that is very uncomfortable for all of us, often. Because if we think about how we think, Nate, is it possible that we could find some flawed thinking and have to decide what we're going to do with it?
Absolutely.
Does anybody like to be told that they may be wrong on how they think about something?
No, nobody likes their head to hurt,
That's right.
from cognitive dissonance or anything like that. And,
Yep.
there's very few times that we really enjoy admitting that we were wrong about something. But, you continue to live life, and if wisdom shows up, which is learning from your experience, if wisdom shows up, then you start to see the value in finding where you were wrong in places.
And Nate, I think what Nelson was really, really good at, from all of our experiences of the guys that have mentored us, that Nelson mentored, is not ever telling you the answer, but seeing if you knew why you believed what you believed.
Yeah.
And was it sound and concrete in a way that you could build a life on? And so what I would say that Nelson has really helped us understand, and it reminds me of a quote I read this morning that Henry Ford said. He said, "Failure is simply the opportunity to begin again, this time more intelligently." Failure is simply the opportunity to begin again, this time more intelligently. So we got to get over ourselves and think and realize we're never going to have it all figured out. So when it comes to whole life and what Nelson was talking about, we talked about behavior and the mindset and the human problem first. That somebody's controlling the flow of money in our life. And there's a way that we can start creating control of money in our life. And the way that we do that is we utilize this product called Whole Life. So he had to, at some point, touch on what does it mean to get qualified for or go through applications to create the entity, and what is really going on in the insurance world. So Nate, he starts off the chapter by defining how insurance really works when you apply for it. And there's a key piece I want to start with here. He says this right here: people that have been through a selection process, not the person off the street. This is an important piece. He's saying that if a large group of people have been evaluated, meaning they have said, hey, this is my height, this is my weight, this is my medical background, this is my blood, this is my urine, all the things that go into insurance, that's not just somebody off the street who may be terminally ill. Because if there were too many things that got into underwriting, that's what they call it in the insurance world, that could make an effect that's very negative quickly. And why is that, Nate? If it was just anybody off the street and they didn't have to qualify.
Well, it's going to skew the numbers for sure.
Yep.
And, the law of large numbers kind of works in multiple ways, because they're selecting, there's 10 million lives essentially that they're looking at. So the law of large numbers in the underwriting process, but then also the law of large numbers when it comes to the people participating in the life insurance company itself. And both sides of that equation is where certainty gets introduced into the conversation, into what's actually taking place, because that law of large numbers is a layer of protection essentially for the people who are involved.
Yep. And just so you kind of high level zooming out, if you have no context of how life insurance works, is it used to be based off of a scale that ended at 100 years. All the math was run off of all people who went through apps and illustrations and underwriting and all that off of 100 years. Nate, since then, when the final was written to 2008, the fifth version, that has changed to age 121. So let's sit in that for just a second and not get too complicated. But at a very high level, Nate, that simply means that we're living longer in America. Now, in Canada, I think their bookend age is still 100, if I'm not mistaken. I may be wrong on that. Guys, forgive me, all my Canadian brothers and sisters, if it's something else. But I think it's still 100. Okay. So we're immediately addressing this reality, Nate, that this isn't magic. This is math. Over hundreds of years with millions of people. Nate, is there anywhere else that you apply for something where that many numbers are run to be sure it creates a guarantee for you?
Not that I'm aware of.
Is there anywhere where those numbers are run to be sure it creates a guarantee for banks, Wall Street, and IRS?
I mean, not really at that level, because every entity outside of a life insurance company or financial institutions are a large percentage of the money that they are playing with or using is just numbers on a screen. It's not necessarily backed by anything.
I was hoping you were going to say that. That's what I was looking for. It's not backed by anything. So anybody listening, one of the things that comes up the most in our conversations before somebody's read Becoming Your Own Banker, I had one yesterday, so it's fresh in my mind. It's a good thing to understand that insurance, and what Nelson was referring to use the product of whole life, first was with a company that was mutual. What does that simply, Nate? Mutual is different than stock or private, right? Which means that if we qualify because of our health and all the things related to us, we are an owner mutually in that company. So that was the first thing. The second thing is a company that's paid dividends for 100 plus years consecutively. Nate, at a high level, very high level for the first time listener or watcher, what does a dividend mean for a mutual company, and why did Nelson say 100 plus years consecutively?
That means in all their projections of operating cost, a dividend is simply an outperformance of their assets and an underestimation of their operating costs.
Yep.
And so essentially what that means is they have been right consecutively on their numbers at some level. They have been in the black for however long that company's been around. So the mutual insurance companies we work with, most have paid dividends for at least 120 years in a row, or more. And so that means if a company has a track record like that, then there is a level of predictability that is now introduced into your strategy, into your process, that you would not have otherwise.
Hey, let's bring it to the level of probably 80 to 90% of people who may have never heard of Becoming Your Own Banker, Infinite Banking before. Let's bring it into something that's relevant to what may resonate with them. That would be like saying, I'm going to put my dollar at my local bank that I bank with, and at the end of every year, they're going to share back with me money that they were profitable because they ran a sound, clean system, because you're an owner of the bank. Now that happens at the bank, right, Nate? But not at the UME level.
Yeah, I'm just realizing that I said that completely backwards. It was the underestimation of the performance of the assets and the overestimation of the cost of doing business. That's what it was.
Yeah, so you'll hear this, so I'm gonna get out there in front of this for anybody listening, watching, thinking, well, I heard Dave Ramsey say that in the tax code, all a dividend is a return of premium. And at the most basic level, that is true, in the sense that you and I pay premiums to an insurance company, Nate, that's been around for 100 plus years, paying dividends consecutively. And then they evaluate all the math and who died, all tied to this mortality table, and all these things. And then they go, oh, we were still profitable. So one of the companies that we work with in COVID year experienced 120% profitability that year from 2020 to 2021. And that is true that it's a return of premium. So I'm agreeing with Dave. What I'm not agreeing with Dave is that he stops there. Because it's also how is that being used in the company and how does it support sound money thinking? And this is where we get into understanding the entity. And as Nelson talks about further on, while we're specifically talking about whole life insurance. Okay, now he touches on term life, and we use term as a product to take over the banking function at some point because it's just tied to math. We can get into that later at another time. But all of this math is based off of not if we're going to die, Nate, but when.
Yeah.
There's one variable that everything is based off of, and let's not just talk about the when, but why is that so important? Why is that so important that it's based off one variable, Nate?
That is based off when?
Yeah, one variable of death, not an if thing, but a when. We are going to die.
Well, it goes back to there's an element of certainty to it. And
Yep.
And Nelson uses an older mortality table just to kind of drive this point home in this section. And one of the things that's interesting, he talks about retirement essentially, and in that example, there was like 3/4 of the pool of people that were going to require income after age 65. And then you factor in the mortality tables changing and increasing. That means there is now a much higher probability that people are going to run out of money in retirement than ever before. Because they had no way of knowing whenever they got ready to retire or whatever, that based off mortality tables, they were projected to live much longer than their parents.
Yeah. And Nate, Nelson, like Nelson does so well, brings up where this came from, because Nelson talks a ton about proper classification, because he was trained as a forester and as a pilot. And if you misclassify things, then the interpretation of what they're supposed to be doing gets misunderstood. Okay. So he says this, and if nobody hears anything else, I want you to hear this piece. The whole idea of the infinite banking concept, this on page 37, started with the realization that there is a huge amount of nonsense going on in the marketplace because of the misclassification of things. So, in regard to whole life, specifically whole life for becoming your own banker in the infinite banking concept, he says a better name for this would have been a banking system with a death benefit thrown in for good measure. What he was trying to get us to understand is that the product of whole life, if you qualify, which is, we call that a privilege to be able to qualify, which is so different than what the world teaches about getting whole life insurance or insurance in general. If you qualify, you are beginning to create an entity that can mimic the banking world. It just takes time and long range thinking to capitalize and make it to where you can take over that. So what he shows on the mortality table is that 65 came from Franklin D. Roosevelt, and he took that from the Germans in regard to Social Security and a lot of other things. You can dive in and read on that. There's tons of data and history that shows that's what happened and why it happened. But the reality is that if this mortality chart says that 75% of the people are still going to be alive at 65 or after, of the 1,000 in this example, then we have to understand that something else has to be looked at. Like, I'm going to live longer than just 65. So Nate, yesterday alone, I had this conversation once, if not twice. And this is because things are misclassified. Because the product sold for dying, I'm talking to somebody that's in their 30s, and they said, well, we went ahead and got term. It's going to expire when we're around 65 because we'll have enough assets then to not need the insurance. And you and I know that's a flawed thinking because of misclassification of really what insurance can be in our life. But it doesn't matter what you and I know, does it, Nate? Doesn't matter what we know first. We had to go through that journey too, right?
Got to meet them where they're at.
That's right. We meet them where they're at. So I said, are you okay with me asking you a question about insurance in general? And he said, sure. I said, would you ever underinsure your house or only pick half of it that you could insure? And the answer is obviously no. And so when you walk through that and you go, well, why? If it's $1 million house, I'm willing to pay thousands of dollars a year to protect that $1 million investment or asset. And that's worth it to you because if you didn't, you're running the risk of what, Nate? If you didn't pay for that insurance, what would have to be the case? A loss?
Yeah.
And would it be an equitable loss, or could there be new variables introduced? What time of year it was, what the weather was like, is lumber more expensive, the cost of living, all these things we can't control, right?
Yep.
So if we know that, now just replace and ask yourself, is your ability to create income, Nate, a greater asset than your house?
Yes.
And you ask somebody that, they're like, absolutely. Is it fully insured? Because that's all the math is doing on these mortality tables. Is they're going, Nate Dean is 44. He creates this much income currently in his life with this many remaining years of working life, roughly. This is how much he could be insured for if his health allows him to. That is not magic, and you cannot be overinsured. So there's a misunderstanding right there, because I used to say I'm worth more dead than alive before I read Becoming Your Own Banker. The insurance industry won't allow it, and that's a good thing. So touch on that, Nate, a little bit. What do I mean when I say they won't allow it, and that's a good thing?
Well, because they're looking
companies.
because they're looking at how much value you're creating. So think about yourself almost like a machine that just spits out money every year. Take the emotion out of it. And so they're just looking really with a fixed income, because they can't project what your income's going to be in the future. So they're just basing it off of your current income now and, what you've averaged maybe the last couple of years, and projecting out however many working years you have left. They might look at me and say, hey, he's got 20 or 30 working years left, something like that. But they also can't factor in that, hey, what if I get to age 65 and I want to continue working? Well, now there's new value that is being created that's not being accounted for. And so they can only go off of their equation, their algorithm, whatever. And so one of the things that's really powerful about having a death benefit that is growing with you is there's going to be new value that's going to be created after, quote, retirement years that you want to protect. And well, how do we do that?
Yeah, and Nate, we're talking about the entity and the product of insurance right now. And I want to, for anybody that doesn't dive into this daily like we do, Nelson's just trying to get us to understand that there's only so many places we can keep or put our money. I think it's a very important piece. He didn't say, I like whole life because it gives me more commissions than if I sold a Roth IRA. What he figured out, and that's one example, it could be all the different products. What he figured out is that whole life was just the best place, like he said, to create a banking system that just happens to also have a death benefit. And that's important. It's so important because one of the biggest first shifts we have to make in this thinking or rethinking of our thinking is my money has to reside or go somewhere. And there aren't really that many places that can go. And wherever it does go, there's a contract or there's a set of agreements that we abide by, whether we realize it or not. And we also have to realize, let's simplify it, that there's only really 4 things that we can do with our money. We can spend it, we can save it, we can invest it. Notice those are 2 different things, or we can give it away. Spend it, save it, invest it, or give it away. That's pretty simple. 4. I don't have to use all my fingers on my right hand. 4 things you can do with money. So if I said, Nate, down at the local bank, there's a thing you can do where you can save your money, allow it to grow like an investment, and also spend it, but the growth occurs on what you made deposits on and never goes down. And when you die, not if, they're going to give you multiples of what you put in there. How long do you think that line be for that bank product?
Yeah.
We just described whole life insurance that you have to qualify for. So if we do a great job of asking awesome questions about the entity and people are willing to lean into what they don't know, just like you and I do every day, because it still challenges us 8 years in, because it's not traditional, then you start going, maybe I had a misunderstanding of whole life. Maybe there was a half truth that I believed. And Nelson says this so well. Most of our understanding, just like mine was, just like Nate's was, of whole life insurance is based off of someone else's misunderstanding.
Well, let me read this section of the book because it's gonna bring up a point that I think is really powerful. So it starts on page 37. It says, the whole idea of the infinite banking concept started with the realization that there's a huge amount of nonsense going on in the marketplace because of the misclassification of things. This is not new, nor is it unique to the financial world. For instance, take the case of the common potato. In the 1500s, the conquistadors of Spain were down in South America, in what is now Peru, looking for gold. They didn't find much gold, but what they did find was a plant that they took back to Europe. It was the potato. But no one in Europe would have anything to do with it because the botanists of the time identified the plant as one from the family Solanaceae. This family has a large number of poisonous plants in it, such as deadly nightshade, jimsonweed. Because of this relationship, it was thought that the potato was poisonous. Also, by the way, the sprouts and the green parts of the potato plant are poisonous. Don't eat them or you can develop serious gastric disorders. From that same family also comes belladonna, a valuable medicine. It is from the leaves of the belladonna plant that we get atropine. Small quantities do marvelous things for the digestive tract, but in large quantities, it can kill you. All medicines are poisonous. The strange thing is that the Europeans went from a condition of thinking that the potato was poisonous to one of large-scale dependence on it. And that last line is what I wanted to bring up is, Brandon, whole life insurance, we used to think was poison. We used to think was deadly because Dave Ramsey said so. And now look at how we use it in our lives today.
Yes.
And it was because of the misunderstanding and the misclassification of what we had been, what we had been told.
Nate, one of the privileges that we've had through the mentoring and coaching and the rooms that the Lord's allowed us to be in the last 5 years, for sure, is this reality that using the product of whole life is not a choice between an investment approach like the traditional world teaches us. It is an and asset, which is very hard to break down because we've only ever had it described to us as a product tied to death for dying, which it brings up all these other things of, why would you put your money there when you could get a higher rate of return over here? And what we want to be clear on is that this is not an either or thing. Nate and I use whole life insurance to make unlimited life concepts run more efficiently because we can control more of the banking function over our lifetimes. Nate and I use whole life insurance because we can refinance outside debt to inside debt. Basically, we can take over cash flow that was leaving our life and we can bring it in. And. So when you understand this, like Nelson said, if you're willing to go on this journey of rethinking your thinking, once you start seeing the problem, you start knowing what to do. And that is an ongoing journey right now.
For sure.
You don't arrive. And that's why Nelson talks about behavior so much at the beginning. And Nate, yesterday alone, I had this same conversation with a very, very sharp person who's doing great. And they said, well, one of the reasons I really like the returns I'm getting on that screen is because I don't have to think about it. And there's nothing wrong with that. And Nate, I think you and I in our journey, one of the biggest things that has evolved for us is this reality of knowing all the players in someone's financial game and letting them decide if they're doing what they want it to do for them, and how whole life can just make that more efficient, more liquid, more certain, with more peace of mind. And that evolves. Some people are like, oh, this makes perfect sense. And some people are like, let me just kind of start slow and wrap my brain around it, which comes back to we are putting our dollars in a place that has hundreds of years of data that's more sound and more conservative and more certain than anywhere else we can put our money. I don't even think that's a debate, Nate. I think we could confidently have a conversation about why that's not a debate as far as those qualities of safety, security, and peace of mind. You touched on early, we'll finish with this because I think this is an important piece. You touched on early in some way or another how this mortality table ties into the guaranteed event of death. And we didn't touch on why that's so important and why, if I have a whole life policy, which is also known as a permanent policy, why that's so important is because the insurance company has to be sure the math works. And why do they have to be sure the math works, Nate?
Because they have to pay the death benefit claim one day. I mean, it is from the moment that you own your policy, you are now a liability on their books, and they have to go out and perform and be profitable to make sure that they can pay that claim one day.
Yep. And this is a piece that took me a while to recognize because I had no idea of this world, Nate, till we started our company and began living this. For the you and me who just grew up saving your money, try to earn 10%, yada, 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 we don't really understand that an insurance company that's been around for hundreds of years doesn't have to make money the way we've been taught that you make money in the world today. They're not correlated to the things or connected to the things that we think are investment strategies the same way we think they are. In other words, they can create long, steady, compounding growth to be able to pay those death benefits because they know the math and they reevaluate it every year. And so, said another way, they've gotten the math right with enough room to share in the profitability of the company with the whole life insurance holders. That's a key piece, right, Nate? Because if I'm carrying a different product with my name on it, do I share in the profitability the same way? If I got a term policy, do they send me a dividend? They don't. Now, does a term policy play a role in our strategy, Nate? Yes. There's a place for it, and when you understand it, definitely can be a benefit. What about how a company operates that's a mutual company? And we'll kind of finish here and segue into the next episode. with their other products that Nelson talks about, universal life, index universal life, anything that's been created, do you share in the growth of the company the same way? There's a difference. We have to understand that. So key piece, if you hear anyone saying infinite banking concept in the open market, TikTok, Instagram, whatever, and they mention IUL, or they mention universal life, or they mention anything other than permanent whole life insurance, in our beliefs, that is not what becoming your own banker and the infinite banking concept is. Because we would never put our dollars somewhere that has any kind of volatility. That's the opposite of what this is teaching first. So that's how we decipher if somebody really understands what we believe to be the truest form of taking over the banking function. So we'll talk about that next week when we have our next discussion on what Nelson was really meaning there. But just remember, it's simply this: you're pulling together large numbers with large groups of people who are healthy, who have the proof of creating value in the world, which is followed by income. And the insurance company is willing to take that mathematical equation for 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years and go, we're willing to do an exchange with you where everybody wins because you're a policy holder and owner of the company. Nowhere else we can put that kind of faith that I know of, other than our Lord and Savior, and knowing that he's coming back one day and knowing that we're going to see him again one day. That's the only other thing that's more certain than this to me in my head. All right, we hope you have benefited from this. We hope it didn't go too far into the weeds, but we also hope it brought you to the awareness that this product of whole life insurance has been so misspoken about and so misclassified and so misunderstood that we really have to start there before we can start understanding how we could use it for taking over the function of banking in our life. Until the next one, we hope we were a blessing to your thought process. We hope we challenged it. We appreciate likes, shares, subscribes, questions, all those things. You can find anything about us on cashflowlegends.com. You can connect with us there. If you have a question and you're like, I'm willing to have my thinking challenged, go there and set up a time with Nate. Shoot us an email and just have a conversation. There will be nothing sold to you. We will just ask you questions and you get to decide if you want to move forward with this thought process or not. So the next one, hope you have a blessed day.